Hello, I'm Michelle King, and welcome to BYU Campus Education Week. This lecture by Emmett Smith, a CES continuing education instructor, teaches that great achievements in every phase of life come from common people doing common things in an uncommon way. The leadership principles of self-worth, honesty, hard work, perseverance, service, and living a full and happy life will be explored. His talk is entitled, Excellence in the Common Man.
On behalf of the church education system, welcome to BYU Education Week. From this great place of excellence, go back with me in time to another great place of excellence, a football stadium. The date, June 1st, 1977. The event at that stadium is the graduation ceremony for 451 seniors at Apollo High School in Glendale, Arizona. Now, as graduations go, this was not supposed to be anything uncommon. In fact, graduations were common all over the state of Arizona that night, the nights before, and the nights to come. But few were aware that something was going to happen at this graduation, which would not only capture the hearts and feelings of all those present, but would be told and retold and retold in the days and weeks and months to come. On that night, an 18-year-old girl would walk 23 steps to receive her diploma. A common act, but what an extraordinary act, one of great excellence, because you see, this girl, Cindy Duncan, had been in a wheelchair for 7 years and had not walked unaided in 7 years. When Cindy was 11 years old, she was on her way to school. She stepped out into a crosswalk. Coming through a red light was a drunk driver driving his automobile in excess of 60 miles an hour. He struck little Cindy. She went up over the hood. She crashed against the top of the automobile. She was flung to the side of the street. And he left the scene of the accident because he knew he had killed her. And indeed, he had almost killed her. Both legs had compound fractures. Her hips were shattered just like you take a puzzle and dump it out on a table. Back injury, neck injury, head injury, and the aorta was ripped from her heart. She was dying. Fortunately, miraculously for her, there were people at a paramedic station that witnessed this accident, and these great people rushed to her side, maintained life until they could get her to a hospital. And there her life was saved. But after 4 surgeries, weeks and weeks and weeks in the hospital, months and years of therapy, she was diagnosed as a crippled, having to live every waking hour in that wheelchair. When she was 14 years old, she entered Apollo High School. When she was 16 years old, she enrolled in my writing class, and we met formally for the first time. When she found out that I had had some challenges in overcoming the difficulties from a terminal brain tumor, surgery for that tumor, she wanted to share some things with me. And that's what we do in this church, is we share. We share dreams, we share hopes, we shared fears. And she shared with me the feelings that she had had and the fears that she had had, the hopes that she had had. One day she came to me and she said, "You know, Mr. Smith, the last month, almost every night, I have a reoccurring dream. I dream that I get up and walk to receive my diploma when I graduate 1.5 years from now." Well, I thought, this is an impossible dream. But after thinking about it, meditating about it for some time, I told Cindy, I shared with her the feeling I had that she could accomplish this dream if she was willing to work hard enough and believe strongly enough in herself and in her Father in heaven. So Cindy started to work. She worked hard in the weight room, she worked at swimming, and we shared our feelings with each other before class, in between class, during classes, lunch hour, and after school. 1.5 years went by, and Cindy had been able to get up on crutches, which was considered a miracle by her doctors, but she so wanted to walk without any aid to receive her diploma. On the day that we were to graduate, she was to graduate, we stood out on the football field and talked about that night. She said, "Mr. Smith, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do it. I've tried and I always fall." I said, "Well, Cindy, you can walk on your crutches. You can walk on your crutches. That's very important, and you tried, and that's important." She said, "Oh, but I wanted to walk." Well, let's go to that night now, where we find Cindy sitting in the second seat of the first row, with her crutches down at her side. In the first seat is a young man by the name of Robbie Kutab. In the seat to Cindy's left is Kevin Redding. These two young men are going to play a great role in the drama that's to follow. The school principal calls for that first row to stand, and they do, except for Cindy. He calls for them to come forward to get their diploma. Finally, Cindy stands unaided. Her eyes come up to those there to witness this graduation, and they meet mine. And down deep within my soul, I knew it. I knew it could happen, and I felt like saying, Cindy, you can do it. You can do it. Later, she told me that she had heard my voice. Well, she had heard a voice, but it wasn't mine. Robbie Kutab stepped a few feet off to receive his diploma, and then he turned around because he felt something happening behind him. He saw Cindy standing there, weaving back and forth. He said, Cindy, come on. I'll walk right beside you. And Kevin Redding went to her other side, and he said, now, Cindy, we're right beside you, one on one side, one on the other, just walk with us. Cindy took a precarious step forward, and then another, slow, painful, exhausting. She inched her way toward tomorrow. One step, another, dragging a leg behind her. Finally, at 13 steps, she stopped. Her knees began to buckle, tears were running freely down her face, and she whispered, I can't do it, it's over. Kevin Redding said, now Cindy, it's not over. I'm right beside you. Robbie Kutab said, Cindy, all you got to do is take one more step. That's it, Cindy. Take another step. That's it, Cindy. Now take another step, Cindy. That's it. And on that night, Cindy Duncan walked 24 steps to receive her diploma and 24 steps back to her seat, and is still walking today toward great productivity and quality in her life. And so it will be with us, brothers and sisters, we the common people, walking to receive our diploma of excellence, hearkening along the fiery trail to the word of the Lord in Doctrine and Covenants, section 4, verses 6 and 7. Remember, faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, brotherly kindness, godliness, charity, humility, diligence. Ask and ye shall receive, knock and it shall be opened unto you. We too, following these great leadership principles, can achieve the marvelous work that the Lord has set forth for us to accomplish. Where do we start on this journey of excellence? We start with a realization that excellence comes from common people, doing common things in an uncommon way, which is the vital spark of leadership that we need in the church and in our lives. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said, I have never met a father or mother that did not want their children to be uncommon men and women. In Doctrine and Covenants, section 82, verse 18, the Lord, through Joseph Smith, said, and all this for the benefit of the church of the living God, that every man approve upon his talent, that every man may gain other talents, yea, even 100-fold. Excellence comes as a result of focusing in on a challenge, praying for direction at every turn, and then acting. I was captain of a very mediocre football team when I was in high school, senior in high school. The season was 3/4 of the way over. We'd only won 2 games, but on that night, we had a chance to achieve such great excellence. We had 4 plays to go 6 inches to score a touchdown and beat the #1 team in the state that had not been scored on the entire season. They had won 7 games, and there we were, 6 inches away from beating them. They had 12 points, we had 7 points. Now, we only had about a minute left in the game, but we did have 4 plays. We had practiced 3 plays that would get us a yard or so, which is what we needed to score this touchdown and win this game. So I called the play 22. This call for the halfback to slash between the guard and the end. He always got a yard or 2. That's all we needed. The ball was handed smoothly off to him. He hit that line. There was a pile-up, all of their team and half of ours. Finally, the referees untangled all the bodies and the heads and the arms and the legs, came to this young man holding the ball, but it was still 6 inches away from the goal. So I called play 10. Play 10 called for the fullback to go just off the tackle in the center. Now, this fullback was as big as a tank. and he always got a yard or so on this play. Again, the ball was handed off smoothly. He hit that line like a rushing bull, and here again this pileup. This time we had a referee in the pileup. Well, they undangled the bodies and the arms and the legs, trying to find this man with the ball, and they did. He's still 6 inches from the goal line. I'm getting a little panicky now, so I'm really going to have to be mean. I called the third play. This is called the Lafayette basketball pass. What it demands is the quarterback just boost the ball up into the air, trying to find one of two receivers. I was one of those receivers. I was the right end. We were to just take a couple of steps and turn around, and he would see which one was open, boost the ball up to that individual. I took a couple of steps. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the other receiver had gone down under a pile of players on the other side. And so I was standing all alone in the end zone, all by myself. There was nobody there. I watched the ball go up, 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 down, turning end over end. I stuck out my hands. It went right into my hands and right through my hands. Bounced around on the ground. The cheerleaders started to laugh. Our cheerleaders started to laugh. Well, I didn't know what to do. We only had about 10 seconds left in the game, so I called timeout. I jogged over to the coach, and I said, "Coach, I've called all the plays that I know to try to win this game. I don't think we can win this game." He said, "Smith, you should have come to me sooner. And you did call all the plays that you know, but you didn't call all the plays that I know." He said, "Turn your hand over," so I did, and he drew out a play on my palm. I took it in, we won the game. Brothers and sisters, every day we meet challenges. Every day we need to score that touchdown. Every day we need to call timeout and go to the Lord. He knows all the plays. Excellence in our lives demands accepting ourselves, doing the best we can with what we have, and not worrying about what we don't have. If there's something in our lives that we need to change, then we change it. If we can't change it, then we move on. We don't worry about it. The greatest bit of magic in life is being content with who we are and being content with what we are. The Apostle Paul, who had many challenges and difficulties, wrote in Philippians 4, verse 11, "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." For 32 years, I opened my room at lunchtime for anybody that wanted to come in and eat their lunch in my room. I would have 5 or 6 or 7 kids in there, sometimes 15 or 20 kids in there, and we'd sit around the desk and talk. Now, I have a philosophy about teaching. The best teaching takes place when people don't know they're being taught, and they don't know they're being taught at lunch hour. Now, we would discuss whatever they wanted to discuss, but I would slyly move it into directions that I felt would be helpful in their life and in mine. And one of those that I continually talk about, still to this day, is this idea of accepting yourself, doing the best you can with what you have. Don't try to be somebody else. Well, it was a Monday, and I had maybe 15 or so kids sitting around the desk, and we were talking about this very, very principle. The back door opens, and this young lady comes in. Her name was Margaret. Now, Margaret was in my first hour class. Now, she was there physically. Mentally, she was on a foreign planet. She was an absolute zero in my class, an absolute zero in everybody else's class. If she ever graduates from high school, it's going to be with her grandkids. Well, I wondered what she was doing there because I knew she hated me. She hated everybody. I suspected that she hated herself. Margaret was 6 feet 2.5 inches tall. She was as skinny as a stick. She turned sideways, she just disappeared. She had a big nose, she had big feet. When she walked across campus or wherever she walked, she would hunch over, I guess to hide that great height. She wore this old, dirty red bandana around greasy, grimy hair that I don't think she had ever washed. It was just stuck out in all directions. And she wore this flak jacket every day, the same flak jacket, all ragged and dirty. She wore this black T-shirt that had last month's, maybe last year's ketchup stains and mustard stains on it. She used a rope to hold up some army pants. She had some jump boots that had no shoelaces in them, and that's the way she looked. She had grime under her fingernails and moss on her teeth. She reeked of body odor and cigarette smoke and sometimes marijuana. And I did wonder why she was being there. And then it suddenly occurred to me, well, maybe she needs to hear this. Maybe she needs to understand that she needs to accept herself. And so I raised my voice so she could hear me. Well, the bell rang that day and everybody went their way. But she came back the next day. and the next day, and the next day, each day getting a little closer to the front of the room. By Friday, she's right in the middle of all these kids, and they've just kind of parted like the Red Sea because of that odor that's surrounding her. Well, the bell rang that day, and everybody went their way, and I thought about Margaret that day and that weekend. And I just wondered if she had heard anything. Well, for 32 years, I always got to class an hour early, hour before the first student. And so that Monday, I was a little surprised to see somebody standing at my door. And as I approached this individual, I recognized that it was Margaret. Well, it was Margaret, and it wasn't Margaret. This was a different Margaret now. First of all, she's standing up nice and straight and tall. She's wearing a dress. She has cleaned her fingernails and polished them. She's brushed her teeth. She has combed her hair. Gone was all of that paraphernalia that she had worn before. And as I approached her, I saw the most peculiar look in her eyes, a peculiar look. It was kind of a peaceful look, the look of hope, the look of change. We often call it the light of Christ, don't we? Well, Margaret said, "Mr. Smith, where have you been? I've got to talk to you." And I said, "Well, Margaret, I'm an hour early." She says, "Well, I've been here for a half hour. I've got to talk to you." So we went into the room and we talked. She said, "You know, I couldn't get out of my mind what you were saying last week. And I thought about it all weekend." And she said, "I decided yesterday that I'm going to change. I'm going to do the best I can with what I have. I'm not going to try to be anybody else but me." I said, "Margaret, that's great. We all need to be that way." She said, "Mr. Smith, when I was in the 6th grade, I was over 6 feet tall. And everybody teased me about my height. Everybody teased me about my nose. Everybody teased me about my feet. And I wanted to be anybody but me, and you saw what I became. And now I'm going to be me." She says, "Mr. Smith, I've written this poem, and I'd like to read it to you because it's how I now feel about myself." And this is her poem, and it says so much better what I would like to say. I'd like to quote it for you. It goes like this. "I saw a little butterfly one warm summer day. She was cute in, well, an odd sort of way. One wing had stripes, the other had spots. Her body was green with red polka dots. Her feet were strange sizes. Her antennae were all bent. But she didn't mind. She was the best God had sent." And you know, brothers and sisters, we are, the way we are, the best that God and our parents could produce. And as the little 5-year-old boy said in his poem, "And God don't make no junk." He really doesn't. We're very special. The scriptures tell us that we're just a little below the angels. Well, Margaret went her way with her new philosophy. She went to night school. She took correspondence courses. She went to summer school. She was 20 years old when she graduated from high school, but she graduated with honors and went out into the world to become one of the top models in this country. I remember seeing her picture on television, seeing it in newspapers and magazines, this beautiful, beautiful lady who is now just being herself. I heard about Margaret for a while, and then I've heard that she had opened 3 modeling schools and had quit modeling. A number of years went by, didn't hear any more about her. Then one day at another high school, many years later, I was teaching a class. The intercom comes on, and Lucille up at the front office says, "Mr. Smith, there's a lady here that wants to talk to you. Her name is Margaret." I immediately knew who it was. I said, "Would you please send her over?" So Margaret came over, and a few minutes later she came through the door. The class just gasped at this beautiful, beautiful lady. Now, she still has the hair that's hard to manage. She still has the big nose. She still has the big feet. She's still 6 feet 2.5 inches tall. Actually, she's taller because she has about 3-inch spikes on. But anyway, she comes in, and I tried to put the class busy doing something. They just wanted to look at her. We sat down and we talked. She said, "Mr. Smith, I've come back to tell you something. I've come back to tell you that I have done the best I can with what I have. I changed the things I could change. The things I couldn't change, I just didn't worry about them." She says, "I have a wonderful husband. I have 6 children. Last year, I made $2 short of $1 million after taxes, and I like the money. I like the good that it can do. I like the direction that it helps our family go. But let me tell you what I like more. I like myself. I like who I am." Brothers and sisters, I don't think there's anything greater we could say about ourselves than to say, "I like who I am. I like the direction I'm going." Hard work, perseverance, change, and a never give in, never give up attitude are the stepping stones of excellence. The Savior in Doctrine and Covenants 127:4 counsels us on the results of work. Let your diligence and your perseverance and patience and your works be redoubled, and you shall in no wise lose your reward. I was standing out on the football field watching a great 2-mile race. They call it the 3,200 meters now. It's 8 laps. 2 of my own boys on my team were just going at each other. One's name was Roger Decker, a Mormon boy, about 5'11", about 150 pounds. The other was Emery Gall, who was 5 feet tall and weighed 79 pounds. And they were just going at each other. They'd already lapped everybody else in that race, shoulder to shoulder that last race, and then one would take the lead, and then the other would take the lead, and finally they got down to the last 100 meters. Their arms are pumping in the air, and their knees are driving high. They're going right down to the finish. One can't gain an advantage over the other. And finally, about, maybe 2 yards from the finish line, they dive across the finish line, go down in the crushed granite, come up hugging each other. Their hands are bleeding, their uniforms are ripped up, but they are great champions and they know it. Standing next to me that day was a young man by the name of Ronnie. Ronnie was a freshman in high school. He was on my track team. He weighed 172 pounds, was 6 feet 2 inches tall, had more athletic potential than any athlete I've ever coached in 32 years. But all season long, he credited luck with the great achievements out there on that team and every place else. Everybody was lucky to be able to do what they were doing. And he started in again that day. Oh, Coach, he said, Roger and Emery are so lucky. They are so lucky to be able to run that well. I wish I were that lucky to be a champion like they are. Well, it's one of those teaching moments we talk about. And I said, oh, Ron, would you like to be lucky and be a champion like Roger and Emery? Oh, yes, Coach, I would like to be. And I said, all right, Ron, I'm going to tell you how to be lucky and be a champion. Your luck is going to start at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. The alarm's going to go off. You're going to get out of bed. You're going to put on your running gear, and you're going to go down to 39th Avenue and Northern, and there you're going to find Roger and Emery. They're there every morning about 5:15. Well, what are we going to do, deliver newspapers? And I said, no, you're going to run 6 to 8 miles, sometimes 10 miles, and you're going to do it every day of the week except Sunday. And then on Sunday, you're going to go to church and pray you're going to stay alive the rest of the week. Now, you're going to run that 6 to 8 to 10 miles when it's hot, when it's cold, when it's raining. If there's an earthquake, you're going to pick your way through the rubble to run your 6 to 8 to 10 miles. Now, I said, now, Ron, your luck isn't over yet. You get home, you shower out, you put on your school clothes, you eat your breakfast, you get to school, and you get to school on time, and you have to be a champion there. Remember, you got to be lucky and be a champion. Now, when the final bell rings, you can't stand around and talk to your buddies. You can't walk your girlfriend home. You come on out to the track. Now, when you get out there, you're going to find Roger and Emery. The rest of the distance runners will come along later. But you see, you'll be out there because you want to be lucky and be a champion. You're going to take a 4 to 6 mile warm-up run down the canal and back. Now, when you get back, the rest of the team's going to be there, and then the workout starts. He said, the workout starts? I said, yes, you've just had a warm-up up to this point. Well, the workout for that day, and it was really the workout, was 25 440-yard runs. This is once around the track. They now call it 400 meters. 25 440-yard runs, and you're going to break 70 seconds in each one. Now, you get to jog 60 seconds in between each one. You don't get to stop. You don't get to throw up. You don't get to fall down. You don't get to die. You may want to die. You may wonder why you don't die, but you don't get to die. Now, after your 25 440-yard runs, I'm going to let you walk a half mile. Oh, he says, I'm grateful for that. And I said, but your luck isn't over. The rest of the team get to leave, but you and Roger and Emery, because you want to be lucky and be champions, will take a 2 to 4 mile warm-down run down the canal and back. And then when you get back, you're going to lift weights for 35 minutes. Then you're going to shower out, dress out, get on home, eat your dinner, do your homework, be in bed by 10 o'clock. I said, because Ron, you know what's going to happen at 5 a.m. the next morning because you want to be lucky and be a champion? I said, now you're going to do all this, aren't you, Ron, because you want to be lucky and be a champion? He looked at me, shrugged his shoulders, shook his head, and walked away. Brothers and sisters, this world is filled with champions. That's why we have been sent here, to be champions somewhere, in the home, in our professions, in our communities, wherever. We've been sent here for that purpose. Now, many will become champions. They'll work hard. Many won't, because they don't want to work hard. They'll just shrug their shoulders, shake their head, and walk away. President Spencer W. Kimball said, "Work brings happiness, self-esteem, and prosperity. It is the means of all accomplishment." Honesty and integrity in every step and in our every act is the course of true excellence. Honesty and integrity make us like ourselves and attract others to us. Honesty and integrity should be the measure of the depth of our character and the character of that of others. Why all this insistence on honesty and integrity in a world that seems to be getting ahead by being dishonest and having no integrity? Elder Mark E. Peterson answers this question. Honesty is a principle of salvation in the kingdom of God. Without it, there can be no salvation. Just as no man or woman can be saved without baptism, so no one can be saved without honesty. As we cannot advance in the kingdom of heaven without a resurrection, so we cannot move into celestial realms without honesty. Perhaps, at least in my mind, perhaps the greatest act of dishonesty is being dishonest with ourselves and with our God, in keeping the commitments and promises and covenants that we have made. When we accept callings, when we pay our tithes and offerings, when we keep the commandments, then we're being honest in what we have promised at baptism, partaking of the sacrament, and at the temple. Paul's letter to the Hebrews counsels, this is in chapter 13, verse 18, "For we trust we have a good conscience in all things, willing to live honestly." All we will ever want, brothers and sisters, all we will ever desire, the excellence of respect, the excellence of praise, the excellence of security, the excellence of satisfaction, and the excellence of spiritual wealth best comes through service to our fellow man. Spencer W. Kimball reveals where service will lead us. Service directs those who serve to the throne of God. I did not run track until I was a junior in high school, and I only did it then because the football coach wanted us to do something in the spring so that we wouldn't get out of shape. And besides that, if I ran track, I wouldn't have to go home and milk the cows at night. But anyway, so I ran on the track team. Now, I'm aware that there are some very painful things out there in track. I coached it for 32 years, and I run it many, many years. And so I'm aware there's some painful things. And I'm not a person who likes a great deal of pain. So I decided that I would pick the least painful thing out there in that track, and that was the 100-yard dash. Now, I'm not a sprinter at all. I don't have that great drive out of the blocks. I don't have that muscle twitch that they talk about. I don't have that slashing finish. But that didn't bother me, because all I really wanted to do is keep my commitment to the football coach, be on the football team, and not go home and milk the cows at night. And it didn't bother me not to do well in the meets. Well, I think I placed third one time in a 100-yard dash, but that's because there were only 3 running in the 100-yard dash. I would go out there and I would kind of jog up and down the track, and I would take a few starts, go over and talk to the girls, and then go home, always too late to milk the cows. Well, anyway, this went on half that season. Then one day the coach, Earl Gieske, comes out and he says, "We're getting swept in the 440 every time. We're getting swept in it. Teams are taking 1, 2, 3 against it. We've got to find a 440 man." He says, "Now, we've got a lot of sprinters. You sprinters get out on the track. I'm going to blow this whistle and start this watch, and you're all going to run a 440, and the person that wins this is going to be our 440 man." I put my hand up and I said, "Coach, how far is a 440? He says, "Well, it's once around the track." And I said, "Well, how do you run it?" "I don't know how to run it." He says, "Well, you run as hard as you can, as fast as you can." Looked at his assistant coach, winked, and gave this evil little grin. Now, what I did not know, but I found out, that a person, even in best condition, can only sprint 300 yards, all out. When you get to that 300-yard mark, if you've been sprinting all out, something happens to the body. It starts to disintegrate. I did not know that. Well, I got out on the track, he blew the whistle, started his watch, and away we went. And I'm in the lead. This is great. I'd never been in the lead of anything. I'm pumping my iron, my knees are driving, I'm going harder and harder and harder. What I did not know was that after about 150 yards, all the rest of the sprinters just stepped off the track. I'm out there all by myself. I ran around that turn, boy, and I'm going harder and harder and harder, and I got right to the 300-yard mark, and then another runner joins the race. Just steps right out on the track at the 300-yard mark. His name was Death. Death reached up and tapped me on the shoulder, and he says, "Smith, it is time to die." And I was dying. I had hot coals in my lungs. I had 50-pound lead weights strapped to my legs. I was flailing out in all directions. I literally crawled across the finish line, knowing that was the worst quarter ever run in the history of running quarters. Coach Gieske runs up to me, he looks at the watch, he looks at me, and he says, 52.6 seconds. He says, "That's the greatest quarter mile, fastest quarter mile run at this school in 15 years. He says, "You know, you could be the greatest quarter miler this school's ever had. Look, you did it all by yourself in a trial run. You're not even in shape. You could be the greatest quarter miler this state's ever had." And I said, "Not me. That hurt. I'm never going to do that again." He says, "Look, Smith, when you get good enough, I'm going to give you this watch." The watch. The watch. We had seen that watch. It was out there every day. It was a gorgeous thing. It timed in hundredths of a second, tenths of a second, 2/10 of a second, minutes and hours. I was surprised that it didn't sing and dance. It did so many things. This was an incredible thing. And I said, "Well, Coach, how good do I have to be to get the watch?" He says, "You'll know." Turned around and walked off. Well, I really wanted that watch. I coveted that watch, and I got rather selfish about it. And I started winning quarter miles, and I'd run off the track, and I'd say, "Well, give me the watch. That was a best time for." "Well, it was pretty good, but you're not good enough." "Well, how good do I have to be?" "You'll know." Walked away. Went right down to the state championship that year. Now I was with the big boys. I surprised the whole world by even getting into the finals. I was 7th man, though, out of the 8 that were going to run, and there was not much hope that I could do very well. Well, the gun goes off, and everybody's out in front of me, and then I started thinking about that watch as I came around the final turn. Boy, I wanted that watch. I was getting arrogant about it and selfish about it, and I started sprinting for the finish, dived across the finish, got 4th place, got a medal, named to the all-state team. I rushed up into the stands to find Coach Gieske, and I said, "Give me my watch. That was great, wasn't it?" He says, "Well, that was one of the best times ever run in the state of Arizona this year, but not good enough for the watch. How good do I have to be?" He says, "You'll know. You'll know." Well, then you know what he did? He retired. But he continued teaching at the same school, and I continued hearing about this watch a couple of times. Got down to the state championship that next year, where I was supposed to do pretty well, but I'd had the flu, and I was weak. I was really weak. Not much hope. Again, I'd struggled through the trials that day and barely made the finals that night. But nevertheless, I was going to give it a try, and I was down in the blocks, taking a few starts, and then I saw the watch swinging out in front of me. I looked up at Coach Gieske. He's got that watch on a cord, like a carrot on a stick. He says, "Smith, I've had this watch cleaned. I've had it synchronized. Maybe tonight's the night." "Well, how good do I have to be?" "Oh, you'll know." I came out of those blocks. I was still behind 3 people at the last 100 yards. I started driving for the finish, crossed the finish about 6 inches in front of the person that got second, won the state championship, set a new state record. I could hardly wait to get my watch. "Where's Coach Gieske?" I asked. "Well, he's in the locker room." I went in the locker room. He's sitting there looking at the watch. He says, "The greatest time ever run in the state of Arizona, right here on this watch." And I said, "I know it was great. Now give me my watch." He says, "Well, I thought about it, but there's something about this that bothers me. I don't think you're worthy of the watch." "Well, what do I have to do?" He says, "Well, you know." Well, I went off to the University of Arizona on a track scholarship. I lettered 4 years in track and 4 years in cross country. I was all-border conference in the 800 meters for 3 years, and I was on a mile relay team that was second in the world. And I didn't hear about that watch again. In fact, I'd forgotten about it. Graduated from college, came home, and started teaching school at the very school that where Coach Gieske was still teaching, the school that I'd graduated from. After a year, we both transferred over to a brand new high school. He stayed there a couple of years, then he retired. I stayed there 10 years, and then I moved over to another high school that had just been built, Apollo High School, where my children were going to go because I wanted to teach and coach them. Well, I got over there and I started teaching and coaching, and then I found out that Coach Gieske had moved in right across the street over into some townhouses. My 3 boys came onto my cross-country and track teams, and at the time, Rick was 14, a freshman. Scott was a junior in high school. Rob was a senior in high school. When Coach Gieske found out about this, he came over to the the track and would watch me coach my boys. And they got better and better. In fact, they held 7 school records at one time. Now, every Saturday, my boys and I would go out for a run. And I could always beat them, even though I was 40 years old at the time, because I used this strategy, and I used, well, 10 miles. They hated 10 miles. And I would pick a distance they just hated. Now, what I would do is I would fall back behind Robin Scott, who would always try to beat me in this. And Rick, 14 years old, he was 6 feet tall, 19 pounds of bones, just right next to me. And he would hang on right beside me for 2 or 3 miles, just right beside me. And then he would just kind of fall back. And then I'd get to about the 7-mile mark, and I would go surging up between my 2 boys, just splitting them apart. Get about 20-yard lead. And then I would let back. They'd come up to catch me. Then I'd let back behind them. Then I'd surge again. They'd come up to catch me. I'd let back between them again. Then I'd continued this on and on and on, 8 or 10 or 12 times. And finally, after about the 12th or 13th time, they'd had it. They didn't want to do this anymore. And so I'd make a final surge and just get stronger and stronger and go into the house and wait for them. And, you know, their old dad had beaten them again. Well, one Friday, it wasn't going quite the way it should have gone. Saturday, first of all, Rick. At 3 miles, he's still there. At 4 miles, he's still there. Just right beside me. 5 miles, he's still there. And I thought, okay, he's getting stronger. He's going to have to put up with what the other 2 put up with. Well, we got to about 6.5, 7 miles, and I was getting ready to make that surge. And I saw Rob look over at Scott and say, now. Away they went. You know, it just caught me by surprise. Well, I had to catch up with them, didn't I? So I caught up with them. In fact, they let me take the lead. They dropped back behind me. And then they surged again. And I had to catch up. And then they dropped back behind me, and they surged again. And I had to catch up. And this went on and on and on and on. And I'd wondered who had taught them these horrible, rotten things to do. Well, finally, they made a surge at about 8.5 miles, and I couldn't do it. My 40-year-old legs just could not do it. They were weak. I was beginning to wobble. I was beginning to gasp for breath. Came to a turn. We have about 1.5 miles to go into the house. Rob and Scott are about maybe 20, 25 yards up in front of me, just running smooth and strong and pulling away. Came to a turn, and standing on that corner was this man. I looked at the man. It was Coach Gieske. He looked at Rob and Scott. He looked back at me. He looked at Rob and Scott. He looked back at me. And just as we got to that corner where he was standing, here comes Rick. Right by me. Just hits me right in the ribs, just continues right on, and just destroyed me. I looked up at Coach Gieske. He just grins. And then I thought, no, I'm never going to get that watch. I'm never going to get that watch. I'm never going to be good enough to get that watch. And I hadn't even thought about it in probably 15, 20 years. Well, it was just devastating for me all that day and the next day. On Monday, I was walking to school, about 1/2 mile, and got right across the street from the school. Coach Gieske lives in the townhouses over to my left. And this young man by the name of Jim Reisner comes out. And Jim says, Mr. Smith, do you know a Mr. Gieske? And I said, yes, I do. Well, he said to give you this. He hands me this little box. I open the box. There's the watch. Haven't seen it in probably 20 years. There's the watch. I pick up the watch. There's a note underneath it. It says, now you're good enough. And it took me all day to figure out what he was talking about. And then it suddenly occurred to me. He wasn't talking about winning medals, setting records. He was talking about service. What I had done is I had served my own children so well, I had used my skills and gifts so well that I had taught them to be better than I was. And perhaps that's a good definition of service, to use the gifts that God has given us, the skills that we have, to help other people even to become better than we are. President Gordon B. Hinckley counsels us to forget ourselves through service. It seems to me, he says, that the Savior is saying to each of us that unless we lose ourselves in the service of others, our lives are largely lived to no real purpose. He who lives unto himself withers and dies, while he who forgets himself in the service of others grows and blossoms in this life and in eternity. Excellence is not found in just knowing the Scriptures. not just loving the Scriptures, but in living the Scriptures. When we live the Scriptures, brothers and sisters, we become participants, not just observers, in bringing to pass immortality in the eternal life of man. I'd like to tell you about a young man that I know that lives the Scriptures, and yet he's never read them. His name was Joe. I met Joe when he was in the 3rd grade. I'd gone over to the grade school to walk my little girl Lori home, who was in kindergarten, and as we turned toward home, I heard this commotion on the school grounds behind us. I turned, it's a fight. As I approached this, I saw it was kind of a curious fight, because the one boy, right on target, right in the chin, right in the mouth, right in the stomach, right in the head. The other boy couldn't get on target, and he was getting pounded. He couldn't get on target. He would throw his fist, he'd miss it by 6 inches. He'd throw it over this other boy's head. He'd throw it in the opposite direction. Well, I had to break up this fight, so I kind of pushed them apart this way. And about that time, the boy that couldn't get on target, he got on target. He threw a fist, he caught me right in the stomach, and I just doubled over in pain. And it angered me. And I took him by the shoulders and kind of pushed him back this way. He turned and ran into a chain link fence that surrounded the school. Got up, ran into it again. Finally, he found the gate, found his way out that gate, and tripped over into the street. He comes up, blood's just dripping down his face. He staggers across the street, trips over the curb on the other side, gets up and zigzags down the sidewalk, turns a corner, and disappears out of sight. I turned to Lori and I said, "Lori, who was that boy?" She said, "Oh, Daddy, that was Joe, and he's blind." He'd been blind since birth, and he was very, very angry at that dark world he lived in. He was just striking out in all directions. Well, I heard a lot of war stories about Joe, this monster, afterwards. Rob, he said, "Hey, Dad, you know that little kid that just about knocked you to your feet, knocked you to the ground?" I said, "Well, yeah, Rob. Well, he tried to do the same thing to the principal. He's gone for a while." Or Scott would say, hey, Dad, you know that little guy that just got the best of you?" "Yes, Scott, I remember." "Well, he tried to claw the eyes out of a teacher. He's through for a while." Just terrible, terrible stories about a monster. And then they kind of drifted off into time. I didn't hear any more about Joe. Years later, I was opening a brand new class at Apollo High School. These were freshmen. There were only 18 of them. They were the best of the best of the best of the best English students coming out of the grade school system. And I was standing up in front of the class the first day and telling them what they were going to be doing that year, the projects we were going to be working on. And every time I'd pause, I'd hear this little sound that goes something like this. Bing, bing, something like a typewriter. I finally recognized that the sound was coming from the last seat of the first row. I walked back there, and here's this kid working on this machine. I looked at it, this kid's typing in Braille. I look at the kid, it's Joe. And I took about 15 steps backward. I didn't want any part of this monster. And yet how wrong I was. In the days and weeks to come, I found out that Joe was cool and calm and smart and dedicated and committed and kind and respectful, intelligent. He was all the things that you'd want a student to be if you were a teacher. He's all the things you'd want one of your children to be. And I couldn't figure out what had happened. What had changed him so? Well, every Friday, I had personal priesthood interviews with my students. Didn't call them that. I only had two in the class that were members of the church. Joe was not a member of the church. And I would call them up and talk to them about how things were going in the class and how they felt about some of the things we were doing. And I could hardly wait to get to Joe. And I called his name, and he works his way up the front, feeling along the chair, sits down in the chair next to my desk. And I related to him how we had first met. And he says, "Oh, Coach, I remember that. I am sorry. I am so, so sorry." And I said, "Joe, no apologies are necessary. You have more than made up for anything that you've done. But I'd like to know something, Joe. I know how you were then. I know how you are now. What has changed you so?" What came out of his mouth was pure Scripture, and he was living it. Listen to this. "Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended." This is Paul speaking. Philippians chapter 3, verse 13. "Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before." How much time, brothers and sisters, do we waste worrying about things that are behind us, wallowing in the past and our miseries there, instead of moving forward as Paul counsels. Joe started coming into my room at lunchtime, bringing his lunch and eating lunch with the rest of the students and participating in the discussion there. Then one day he was gone and he became the topic of the discussion. They were talking about what a great kid he was and all the great things he was doing. And one of the boys said, yeah, Joe is a great guy and I really like him, but you have to realize Joe's been blind since birth. He is used to this in his life. Well, brothers and sisters, I'm not sure we get used to any obstacle in our life. What we do is we learn to adjust or we perish. Listen to this essay. When they come into my room the first day, I give them about 15 minutes to write on this question, who am I? And I'd like to read part of what Joe wrote that first day. Who am I? I know who I am. I'm Joe de Benedictus. I know I'm blind. I know I'm in a world for seeing people. My blindness has and does cause me problems. I know it causes people around me problems. I have learned, however, that I have to like what I do have. And I have learned to look beyond what I don't have. Alma speaks of this very principle in chapter 29, verse 3. But behold, I am a man, and do sin in my wish, for I ought to be content with the things which the Lord hath allotted me. I found that Joe and I lived in the same neighborhood. I'd leave my house, which is on 48th Avenue, go out to 47th Avenue and walk to school, a little over a half mile. And one morning as I was walking to school, I saw Joe up in front of me walking to school, and so I picked up the pace, went alongside of him, and we walked to school together. And that happened a number of times. Then he started waiting for me on a certain corner, and we would walk to school. One morning as we were walking to school, a man was backing out of his driveway, and I put my hand up to Joe, and I said, wait, Joe, for this man to back out of his driveway. He's not going to stop for us. I felt Joe's right hand come up under my left elbow, which is the sign from a blind person that they want and need your help. And I felt very good about this, that I could help Joe, that I could direct him. And so every morning as I would meet Joe, I'd put his hand under my elbow and we'd walk to school, and I'd warn him about all these dangerous things. There's a curb here, Joe. It's rough in the street, Joe. You got to step up here, Joe. And especially when we got down to 48th Avenue and 47th Avenue and Northern, a very, very busy intersection. School's right across the street, stoplight there. And so we would stop at the light, and I'd say, now wait, Joe, until the light changes, I will take you across to your first class. Did that many times. It became a habit. Then one morning, I stayed up very, very late with a family. I was their bishop. And finally, I went home, went to bed, worried about him for another hour or so, and finally went to sleep. My wife let me sleep a little longer that morning, but suddenly my eyes blinked open. I looked at the clock, realized I was going to be late to meet Joe. I had to meet Joe. I had to help him. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just rushed out there, and Joe was already on his way to school. I guess he thought I wasn't coming. And I knew I had to help him, and I got to the point that I was actually running when I saw him step up to that stoplight, hesitate, and I started to yell, Joe, don't do it, and he stepped right out in the traffic. Cars were coming to a screeching halt, the turning sideways, smoke was pouring off their tires. Joe was standing out in the middle of that street with his hands over his ears, just shaking. I sprinted out in the street, I grabbed him by the arm, I pulled him over the side. He turned to me as if he could see. Had this angry look on his face, shook my hand off of his arm. He said, Coach, I can't walk to school with you anymore. I'm depending too much on you. What am I going to do when you're not around anymore? Again, Joe was speaking the scriptures and living the scriptures. Listen to the words in 2 Nephi chapter 2, verse 16. Wherefore the Lord God gave unto man that he should act for himself. Yes, we need our teachers, we need counselors, we need bishops, we need parents. We need those who will help us. But in the end, we have to walk the path. Nobody can kill the giants except us. Joe went forth with great courage, determination, resistance. He was a fighter. You had to give Joe some leeway now if you were a teacher in one of his classes. Joe could speak 4 languages fluently. He could write on a typewriter 4 languages fluently. He could write in Braille 4 languages fluently. If you had him write something during your class period, which had to be turned in during the class period, he would put this little device down and block print it. Very slow, very legible, but slow. And so you had to give him a little leeway sometimes, and the other students understood that, and most of the teachers. But he did have one teacher, It did take a little more time with Joe, and this teacher was uncomfortable with having Joe in the class. And one day he put them to work giving them 45 minutes to write on some historical problem or whatever it was. And he said, now, when I tap this bell, that means the 45 minutes is up, which was plenty time for everyone except Joe. The 45 minutes is up, you turn it in, that includes you to Benedictus, you're no better than anybody else. Well, at 45 minutes, he tapped the bell, everybody was handing it in, Joe put his hand up and he says, could I have one more minute? 30 seconds, I can finish this. This teacher screamed, just screamed at him. Why do they allow you people in here? You can't possibly accomplish what normal people can. You ought to be with your own kind. Now, Joe got hurt by this, but remember, Joe's a fighter. We discussed what to do. So he decided he's going to triple his efforts in that class. That teacher asked him for 5 pages. He's going to give him 15. If he asks him for 10, he's going to give him 30. But now he's going to do it all in Braille, in French, and turn it into the teacher, in Braille, in French. And I think that teacher found out what those people can do and what they can do. What could Joe do? Played 9 musical instruments by ear. All stayed on 5 of them. Took all accelerated classes. He's an honor student. Rode a bicycle, rode a horse, acted professionally, danced professionally, sang professionally, wrestled on the school wrestling team, had a band that went around and played at proms. He had saved enough money to go to college by the time he graduated from high school. Joe learned about his world as we should learn about ours, through education and prayer and study and meditation and experience. He had an incredible ability to listen. He could listen to his combination lock. The tumblers fall into place and open that lock to get into his book locker. He could listen to anybody's tumblers fall into place and get into their locker, which made him a definite threat to his enemies and a help to his friends. He knew his friends and enemies by their footsteps and voices and actions. He told me one time, I keep my friends close, but I keep my enemies closer. Think about that one. The night he graduated and received a standing ovation, we were standing out on the field, and I said, Joe, everything is yours now. I don't think there's anything you can't accomplish. He says, I don't know, Coach. I'm kind of afraid of the tomorrows. And then he said something I think was very wise and very true. He says, but I think everybody's afraid of the tomorrows. And I believe that that's true. And then he said, and here again the scriptures, and he was living it. He said, I have found the more I prepare for tomorrow, the less fear I have. Doctrine and Covenants, 38, verse 30. But if you are prepared, ye shall not fear. Brothers and sisters, our goal, our profession, our job in this life is to walk the path of excellence. That's why we are here, to walk the path of excellence in our families, in our professions, in our communities, in our church callings. Excellence is why we have been sent here. We must use whatever time we have, every minute of it, in great endeavors. This is the contract we made with the Savior through baptism at the altars of the temple and by partaking of the sacrament. We're told we have to endure to the end of this life in achieving excellence. It doesn't stop. It's enduring to the end. I know this to be true, and I testify of it. I testify to you that God has provided a plan by which we can walk that path of excellence. It's called the gospel of Jesus Christ. I testify to you that he's provided a prophet, even Gordon B. Hinckley, who will direct us along that path if we will listen. I know that this is true, and I know that this is his church, and I know that we are here to achieve great things wherever we might be. And I testify of this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.